械系的 Hertzberg 老师来。那我先介绍一下那个他的背景。就说之前大概10几年前，我参加美国物理学会流体力学分部的年会的时候，就是他们有一个特别的 session 在讲教育方面的事情。那时候听到他的讲很接近这些主题的经验，就觉得非常的特别觉得这是我们需要的东西。可是，在国内一直没有相关的机会。那到现在，这个比较跨域的教学活动。变得大家都重视的时候，我们有这个机会可以请他来分享他的经验。那过去10几年来，他也一直在这方面努力，所以累积经验可能比那时候更多。I just mentioned that I met Professor Hertzberg in APS DFP meeting maybe 15 years ago in America, and I heard her speech about education, and I was so impressed. But there's no chance to invite you here until today we emphasize on cross-disciplinary education. So as Professor Saito from Japan, he was a professor in art in Tsukuba University. He just retired and now he is teaching in another university in Japan. I'm glad that he can also join us today. He will speak in the next few days also about cross-disciplinary teaching. But they have different experiences, so we can compare and discuss more later. 那我们也欢迎说，国内不止我们 UFO 计划，包括成大校内不同领域的老师都能够来这边参加。那今天很高兴，我们工学副院长、副院长可以来。然后像还有college 10的黄老师。那另外UFO 计划里面，像清大王院长也是长久以来就跟理工学院合作很密切这样子。那这些经验，我想等一下我们后面特别安排比较长的时间可以讨论。所以就一般演讲1个半小时左右。之后，我们不是只有15、20分钟讨论，我们安排1个小时左右。我们希望说可以比较仔细来看。那今天讲的比较接近，就是说从工学的角度看，所以即使 UFO 计划里面，我们会有一些理工学院老师来参加。那我们如何帮助他们？或者说，如果就本身像我这样是工学老师，可能也会对在工学里面怎么改进教学，怎么跟艺术的融合的。这方面的教育来加强，都有关系。我们今天比较先从这个角度出发。那它相似的这个经验，明天在 UFO 的交流会里面，就会比较从人社领域的角度出发。所以有一些内容会跟今天重复了。那如果2天都有报名，就不要觉得太习惯，但是是设计给不同的背景的人来看的这样子。Okay, so that's about the background. So now let's welcome Professor Hertzberg. Talking about why teach art in engineering.
Thank you. So first, just kind of an outline of my talk. I will first give some definitions for art and aesthetics. I don't think I need that. You can hear me in the back of the room? Yes? Very good. Thank you. I will give you a little bit of context on C.P. Snow's divide, what we call the division of two cultures that we've had since the 1930s or even earlier. We'll give you an example of an attempt to bridge this gap using a class that I developed on flow visualization and show you some examples of the kind of aesthetics in this realm of engineering and physics. There's definitely aesthetics to be found there, and I will be asking you to think about the aesthetics of your discipline. So maybe I can take a moment now. Can I see, are there engineers or engineering professors in the room? Okay. And are there people from with a background in art? Okay. And humanities? Good. And social science? Okay, very good. So I originally designed this talk today addressing engineering professors, but I hope that we will be able to talk together and that we can learn from each other. And I welcome perspectives from everyone in the room, and I think it would be very interesting for us all to talk together. So I will offer this one example from my flow visualization course, and then tell you about the transformative experience, illustrating with an example from two famous authors in the United States, Twain and Feynman, and then tell you a little bit more about my second class that I've developed on the aesthetics of design, and a little bit more of a couple engineering, education, psychology concepts, the growth mindset, and how we develop engineering identity. And so I'm hoping you can think about that from your perspective as well. And please forgive me. I'm an engineering professor, and my identity is firmly in engineering. And so I don't know how you will find my contexts, how you will understand from your perspective these ideas, but I'm hoping that you will tell me so that we can learn together. So, in the history of Western art, knowing that the history of your culture is much older, actually, in many ways than ours, but in Western art, the term science and art used to be the same. Is this also true in Chinese culture, in Taiwan, Japan? So science was once art because everything that humans did, everything that we created was considered an art. Whatever humans made, that was art. But then the early university structure, 500 years ago, 600 years ago or so, when universities in the Western world began, the structure was based on what we call the liberal arts. So grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy were all the liberal arts. And you'll notice the ones in yellow there, we now consider not to be liberal arts at all. They are part of our STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. So that began some of this division that I'm referring to. Along comes the 18th century, and fine arts, the idea of a fine art was invented. Did not exist before then. Art and art criticism came along, and here the fine art, the liberal arts were now divided into fine arts and liberal arts. So we have painting and sculpture, architecture, music and poetry are now fine arts, and everything else became science, technology, engineering, and math are STEM topics. They were not art anymore. Art was excluded from these STEM topics. Humanities were also excluded from STEM topics and began to be treated differently. Education in those areas was very different than education in STEM. And in fact, some arts at that time were no longer considered art, and their status was lowered to become a craft. Any object that was created with a function, rather than simply an aesthetic purpose, was considered a craft. And there became a little bit of a gender division here as well. Much of the kind of artwork that women were making in terms of embroidery or functional objects for the home were considered craft and not high arts, which were more done somewhat by men. So there was a little bit of a gender division there as well. So proceeding with our definitions, we have kind of two questions to consider. The question of what exactly is art, and what good is art, meaning what is the purpose of art? This question is answered by art theory. And please, is this Professor Saito, is this agreeing with your definitions as well? Okay, good, all right. So art theory is, answers this question of the purpose of art, what art is, whereas what is good art, what is the quality of the art? First, we need the definition of what art is, and then we can talk about the quality of art. And that question is answered by the topic of aesthetics. So I will try to be consistent with these two definitions. So this has been developed since the 18th century. So in answering the first question, we have a number of the major art theories. So these are the reasons that we have art. So going back to 500 years BC, we have the Greeks who defined this idea of realism, that art is to represent our reality. It's how we communicate our perceptions of the world around us to each other. So the more realistic an artwork is, the better and more beautiful it is. So this is the concept of Plato, that representations, art representations should be truthful, that beauty is truth, and that our human perceptions are fallible, but there is this invisible true world that has ideal forms. His student Aristotle went a little bit further and said that beauty is both the appearance of something in terms of order and harmony and symmetry, and functionality. So we have form and function, that together they make beauty, and that this is art. If it is an accurate representation, if it has form and function, then it is considered beautiful. And that is what art is for representing reality, for realism. And that was true up until photography was invented. Photography kind of freed art from the duty of representing reality. And after that point, around the 1850s, art was now free to embody emotions and express human feelings, and that it was now more used for that purpose. That was the purpose of art, was to communicate these things that are very difficult to communicate when you are being strictly realistic. So the idea of art was to embody and to stimulate emotion, often using metaphor and analogies and stories and so on. There's a little bit of a side concept there that I want to mention, and that is what we call cognitivism. This is the idea that art can be used to teach. We had a very famous education philosopher in the middle of last century, Dewey, and he spoke about how the aesthetic experience, to experience the aesthetics of a work of art, for example, it could give meaning and value. So I'm gonna come back to that in a little bit later in the talk. Okay, so expressionism was now part of it, and then the whole art world changed very radically around the 1900s when the idea of formalism came out. This is where we get abstract art. The idea that art can be about only the color, or only the shape of a line, or a texture. This was called that art can represent these things, and that this is can be beautiful all in its own. Formalism. Since 1968, however, we've been in the postmodern era, where art, the definition of art has begun to be more broad now. It serves all of these purposes, and that art and aesthetics cannot be separated from the rest of the human world, from social, ethical, political considerations. And no theory is absolute, that art must be in a context. So that's where we are today. I get a lot of this from a very nice little book by Terry Barrett called Why Is That Art? Because I think we've all seen examples of a work of art, especially from the formalist or the postmodern era, and you look at it and you go, my child can do better than that. So he discusses all of these art theories, these reasons why we have art and what purpose art can fulfill for us. So, based on this reading, I want to present to you a kind of a synthesis that involves maybe going back to that original definition that art is anything that humans make. So, I offer to you this idea that art can be the embodiment, the instantiation, creation of a vision. If we have an idea and we make it happen, we make it so, that can be considered art. This means that anything that humans do can be elevated, can be raised to be an art. So it may be cooking, creating an incredible meal. How many of you have had a meal that you felt was a work of art? Yes? Okay. For example, mathematics is often considered very beautiful. We have the idea of the elegant equation in mathematics. This is an art, yes? In physics, I will show you many examples from fluid dynamics where you can think of the illustration of physics can be an art. Or even sports. Has anyone seen some example of sport, the excellence of an athlete can be considered an art. So anything that we do can be raised to this level if it is done with intention. It can't be a mundane activity. It can't be, I'm thinking about walking over and hitting the space bar on my computer, okay? Nothing mundane could be considered an art. But I could conceivably have a vision of such a way of doing that it could be a performance. Okay, I'm going to hit my space bar. That was a work of art. Okay. Okay, so, fine. I want to emphasize here that art is not a luxury. It's not an afterthought. When we teach engineers, especially mechanical engineers in my discipline, we don't talk about art with them. They may take a social science class, they may take an art appreciation class, but that's considered not engineering. And instead, the idea that art is only an afterthought, that it is not, it's not intrinsic to what humans need. I think that's wrong. I think that art is not a luxury, that it is more important in times of stress and warfare and bad economy and desperate times. I think at that point, art is even more important than ever to give meaning to our lives. This is a quote from one of my students that I love because the student expressed it better than I can, saying that art and aesthetics can give meaning to our lives and are actually crucial for explaining or getting through all of our difficulties, racism, wars, and pressures. And that this is something that all humans should have in their lives. That art is that important, is that central to what we are as humans. So this is my theory of art. What art is for. It's for helping us. So now we have one or more definitions of what art is. Now we can talk about aesthetics. Aesthetics being a number of, it's a powerful word. It has many definitions. It can be formally the study of beauty, meaning that is, and that is kind of its classical definition, just the study of beauty. But I tend to use it also as a metric, as a measurement for art. Now that we know what art is, the aesthetics will tell us whether a given artwork is good or bad. We compare it to the ideal, and the aesthetic tells us where this work of art falls on the scale between good and bad art. Okay? It is also being used currently in the study of psychology. Do we have any psychologists here today? Not formally. Okay. They're using the term aesthetic to be a study of when we evaluate something. Not something emotional necessarily, but let's say we're tasting a cup of coffee, okay? No emotional investment in it, but aesthetics, our vision of what it should be, tells us whether it's good or bad, whether we like it or we don't like it. And that like versus don't like, the psychologists call that affect. Okay? Affect is the fancy psychology word for emotion. You like, you don't like. Okay? So on one end, you would say, wow, that's a great cup of coffee. I love that. Well done. And on the other end, too burned, over roasted, no good. Yeah. Okay, so I think of that, in English we would say yuck to yum. Okay? Doreen's laughing because we talked about the word yum at dinner last night. All right. In the world of artists, however, the word aesthetics often means kind of design rules, design guidelines. That a given artist or an art movement will have a set of aesthetics that define what that particular movement may be. So you can recognize a painting of Jackson Pollock by the aesthetic that he uses, the techniques, the colors, everything that goes into making that. Okay, so these are different definitions of aesthetics. So now if we go back to the history of Western art, we had that photography freed art for expressionism, for communicating feelings, and then in the world of art, emotion became prized. The more the artwork could affect the emotion of the viewer, the more the better it would be, the higher the price someone would pay for it. Okay. So now art is mostly fine arts, and it's created for aesthetic purposes. On the other side, we have science and engineering and all of our STEM topics, where emotion is not prized at all. We are supposed to be objective as scientists. Our emotions should not enter into our work. Having emotions about our work as scientists could contaminate, could bias our findings. So emotion is considered dangerous in the world of science, in the world of engineering, right? You want to be able to make very dispassionate, objective judgments about things. And that has been extended to the idea that aesthetics has no role in STEM topics. And that is why our engineering students are not generally encouraged to be artists, to take art classes, because we want them to remain dispassionate I think this is a problem. I think this has been bad for humanity. I think I am talking to people who agree with me. So this has led to these two cultures. C.P. Snow was an author in London, and he wrote a very influential lecture in 1959, and he recognized that we have now two cultures in our society. That we have the society of scientists and engineers and people who create technology, right? And then we have the other side, which is arts and humanities. And that the way that the people who become professionals in these two areas has become very separated. Since then, many have called for bridging this divide. That this, as you all do, as I do, you recognize this is a problem. This has led to creations in our society that where we have created technologies that have ended up being harmful to ourselves and to the planet because we didn't consider the humanity side of it. We have people who are raised and study humanities deeply who, you know, maybe they can use their cell phone but they would never actually be able to be creative with it. They may not even like technology at all. So this is a problem. And there have been a lot of, the reason that we're all here today is to talk about how to bridge this gap, how to bridge this divide between these two cultures. So I will propose aesthetics and art can be this bridge. Aesthetics can be a valid motivation for doing science in the first place. It's not all that science is trying to solve problems. Yes, science science and engineering and technology, that's all very important for solving the problems that we have. We are all trained as problem solvers in engineering. That's what we do. But that leaves us, think of how tiresome that would be to spend your life solving somebody else's problems. There's no meaning there necessarily. But if you consider the aesthetics of something, if you do your science or engineering or technology for the love of whatever it is, for the appreciation, for the beauty, that can bring a whole new level of meaning to our work as technologists. So it can give pleasure, it can drive intrinsic motivation, meaning I want to do it because I like it, not because you're paying me to do it. If you pay me to do it, that is an extrinsic motivation. And that has been shown to be of small value in getting humans to do things. But if you can get them to want to do it through an intrinsic motivation, they will do much better. They will take whatever they're doing and raise it to the level of an art. So aesthetics are a valid motivation for doing science. So I propose this hypothesis that creating art is possible and beneficial for all humans. You don't have to be an artist to create art. If we use my more general definition of art could be anything, then everyone can be an artist with the right mindset. At the same time, applying the discipline of science is possible and beneficial for all humans. So I have art students in my class, and some of them have never been asked to write or document what they made or how they made it or why they made it. But if they could do so, if they would do so, they would benefit. They would then become more professional in the making of their art. So I think that we need to approach this divide by asking people to cross it themselves. let's have let's have a discussion now, actually. Okay? So, please turn to 1 or 2 or 3 people near you. And I'm going to ask you to think of an example of aesthetics in your discipline, in your profession. Is there something that you love, okay, what you have this emotion about, okay? Something that you love about your work. Maybe there is a spectrum from an aesthetic in your work, from, that's a terrible approach to the discipline and this is the way it should be done. It might be something like that, where you actually have an aesthetic that helps you evaluate your discipline. So please, talk to each other now.
We need them right away to help solve the problem.
Yes, to solve problems, but what do you love about biology? What did you love about it? I was going to say, what do I love about history?
Very good.
That's why I became a historian.
Yes.
Good stories.
Good stories. So important.
Yes.
Right. So I see several groups here. Would someone like to offer an example of an aesthetic in your discipline? Yes, please.
Human resources professor, taking leadership as an example. Some leaders, they just do what they want. They don't care about the feeling of their employee. If they care about their feeling, emotion, and their leadership will become more effective. So that's the kind of meaning for me.
Okay. Yes. The skill of a great leader can be considered an aesthetic, a beautiful thing when it's done well. Yes, that's a great example. Another example? Yes? No? No one wants to speak in English. I get that. I understand that.
I can say that.
Yes, please.
Well, my undergrad was in biology, and the reason why I wanted to be a biologist was I was very interested in any kind of life forms, and I think all the pictures from biology they were just so beautiful. But then later on, I switched to history, and for me, as a trained historian, well-told stories is a great pleasure to read, and especially stories that can make us understand the past or can give us meanings and can make sense of lots of things.
Okay, so the idea that history has beautiful stories, well told, that can give meaning to our lives and our understanding of the past. Thank you. Okay. All right. So now I would like to show you some examples from my discipline. I study fluid mechanics, the physics of gases and liquids, and plasmas, but maybe not so much plasmas, mostly gases and liquids. So I teach a class. I teach 2 classes that I'll tell you about today. I teach a class in flow visualization where we try to make the physics of gases and liquids visible. And I teach another class on design, because engineers are all about design. That's how engineering is different from science. We design things. And I want to talk about the aesthetics in design. So these are 2 courses. And in both of these courses, I try to have mixed teams of students. They are doing work in engineering and science, but for aesthetic purposes. Engineers are allowed and expected and encouraged to be artists. And these are students who have been through 3 or 4 or 5 years of nothing but hard science and engineering classes where aesthetics is never mentioned. Art is never mentioned in these courses. So the first class I'm going to tell you about is flow visualization, where if we can make the fluid physics visible, we can see how beautiful they are. And so in a way, doing art, especially formalism, where it's about the lovely curves and the colors and the textures, it's not hard to make real beautiful art in flow visualization. I'll show you many examples of that. And then later I'll talk about the aesthetics of design, where students are allowed to make anything they like, but they have to consider aesthetics as an important part of the design. And for all of my engineering, mechanical engineering students, certainly, this is very new, that they have never been asked to do anything like this in their entire college career. So, let's start with the flow visualization course. It is structured with teams of mixed students. I have about 1/3 graduate students and 2/3 undergraduate students. Maybe as many as 50 in a semester, but that's a bit too much. The class is much more comfortable with about 30 students in it. I have always tried to get art students to take my class. This has been difficult, partly because of administrative problems. Art students tend to have a different schedule than the other students in the university. Art students take studio courses where they are in a studio for 4 hours in an afternoon, whereas engineering students, they either have 1 hour Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or they have 75 minutes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so their days are all blocked in these kind of structures. So getting the art students to enroll has been difficult because of the scheduling. And also because, as I mentioned earlier, the flow visualization course, a lot of the art is falls into the idea of formalism, where it's beautiful because of the forms and the lines and the colors, but our education for professional artists, the ones who are going to graduate with a degree in art, they are expected to create conceptual art, where the art has to have a very specific statement that they are making about something in society, for example. And so the work that they would do in this class, formalism, is not as valuable to them in their pursuit of their degree. So I have fewer art students enrolling in my class, but I do have a lot of students in a new program that we have, which is called Technology, Arts, and Media. And these are the students who are getting degrees that will allow them to make, for example, beautiful websites or very sophisticated human-computer interactions. So there's a strong background in computer science, but it is they're studying how to make interactions with people, and they are using a kind of empathetic design approach. And so they have a little bit of training in arts as well, and so they are now in my class with my mechanical engineers. I spend a fair amount of time lecturing, and sometimes I will have a laboratory section where the students can work together, but I found that I don't really have to do that. That instead I give them homework assignments to make these images, and they do it on their own. And I don't have to design a lab, I don't have to write a lab procedure. It makes it very easy for me, and it makes it more meaningful for them. I give them 6 assignments in the semester. The first one they do on their own. Okay? They don't know anybody else in the class. Maybe they know 1 or 2 students. Sometimes they will work together, but generally it's an individual assignment. And they work at home in their kitchen or bathroom or garage, and they make an image all by themselves, and they have to create the flow the gas or liquid physics that they're considering. They have to do all that, and they have to photograph it accurately to represent the physics. And this is actually very difficult. So this motivates them to want partners, to want to be on a team, because they found how hard it is to do this by themselves. So then I give them, I put them together on teams so that they have different resources available. One student may have a very good camera. Another student may know how to do video editing. A third student may have access to a laboratory with a laser in it. And so I try to put them on teams where they have, everyone has some sort of a resource or skill that they can bring to the team to share. I also ask them to photograph the sky, because the clouds are a form of flow visualization that everyone has access to every day. And in Colorado, we have very beautiful skies. We have very beautiful clouds. The mountains create very interesting cloud formations. But really, the clouds all over the planet, similar kinds of physics. So I don't tell the students what to do. They choose what they want to look at and how they want to look at it. Students all have pretty good cameras in their cell phones these days, so I don't have to provide any equipment for them even. But I do require that they create detailed reports, and I scale my expectations. The graduate students in engineering are expected to talk about the fluid physics, to do some research on their fluid physics, and create something that is perhaps worth publishing. Whereas a student who has only experience in art, maybe an undergraduate who knows how to do video editing and has never done anything like this before, I expect them to document their work so that someone else could repeat it. This is a very basic level of requirement for doing any kind of science. You have to document it well enough that someone else could repeat it. And so this is what I ask the artists in the class to do. In my lectures, I talk a lot about it's really mostly science content, but I do it without mathematics. This is important both for the engineers and for the artists in the class. It's it gives a context to the engineers who may have seen very complex equations and the difficulty in solving the mathematics, but they may not understand the physics at all, never having seen it, right? Maybe they saw a photograph in a book, and maybe they saw a YouTube video, but by creating the physics themselves and playing with the flow, they gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of the physics. But no mathematics. I don't require them to do mathematics. I expect them to maybe read technical literature about it so that they understand the physics. So I talk about photographic techniques. A typical course for us is 45 hours, so 7 of those I will spend on how does light interact with matter and how to make the fluid physics visible, because our most famous fluids, water and air, are both transparent. Right? We can't see what's going on. There's incredible fluid physics going on around us right now. We can't see it because it's all transparent. But flow visualization is all about how to make those physics visible. We can add a dye, we could add a fog, we could add seed particles. We may use the temperature differences to show us how light is bent differently by warm air than cold air. And so there are a lot of techniques that use the index of refraction of a gas or a liquid. So we talk about seeding, we talk about other kinds of techniques. I spend a little bit of time talking about actual specific fluid phenomena, mostly clouds. What do the clouds tell us about what is going on in the atmosphere? Why are some clouds puffy? Why are some clouds flat? What are the names of all the different clouds? You know, small children are taught cirrus, cumulus, stratus, right? How many of you remember some cloud names from when you were a child? Yes? No? Okay, a little bit. You might. Oh, okay. So there's a whole taxonomy, and so they are expected to identify the clouds and then therefore understand what are the physics going on. Anytime a cloud is seen, it's because the air in the cloud is actually moving upward. If the air is moving downward, the cloud vanishes. It is warmed and evaporates and is gone. So anytime you see a cloud, it's because the air is moving upward. And what are the mechanisms to make air rise? We talk about several different mechanisms for that. So we talk about that kind of, that level of understanding the physics. We spend a lot of time critiquing, talking about the students' images. So every work that a student produces during the semester is discussed by the class. Students are asked to do critique, not criticism. Critique is where you say what is the strength of this work, and also what could be changed, or ask why was it done this way and not that way. So we spend a lot of time on critique, and that is when I communicate more about the fluid physics. Oh, you have made an example of the Rayleigh-Taylor instability. Why don't you go and read about the Rayleigh-Taylor instability, and then you can write about that in your report that then gets posted. Sometimes I have guest lecturers come and talk about more formal aspects of art or aesthetics or how technology works with art. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. That's not such an important part of the class. But I do expect students to talk about the aesthetics, and we have a very formalized critique structure on how to communicate with the artist about their work. So I'm not going to talk about that today. Maybe I will add that to my second presentation, day after tomorrow. Questions so far? Okay. So this is an unusual class to teach a course about fluid mechanics without any equations. Never been done. This is the first flow visualization course, although as Professor Chen mentioned, I've been talking about this at the Professional Society where we discuss fluid mechanics, and so now there are 2 or 3 other courses in the United States that focus on flow visualization. It's also unique because there have been other courses where you put artists together with engineers, but it's always the artists doing art and the engineers doing engineering. And I make them switch roles. I think that that is an important aspect of why this class works. So the art students are expected to be scientists, and the engineering students are expected to be artists, to create expressive images with impact and intent, to take what they're doing and make it an art. I don't grade them on whether they make good art or not. That's not for me to decide. Instead, you have to make an image or a video, and you have to write a report about it. And you have to post it on our website. So, this website is very well known. Go ahead, many of you have computers and phones, Google the words flow visualization. Anyone want to do that for me real quick? Yes, flow visualization. So Wikipedia may come up with a definition first, yes? And then what's the second reference? Flowviz.org, do you see that? Yes? Okay, that's my students' work. It has had a #1 Google results. It used to be #1, now Wikipedia. Okay, fine, Wikipedia. And maybe someone has paid Google to put their website first. But after that comes my students' work. So their work is referenced by people around the world every day. Anything that they write for my class becomes part of their professional identity forever. So they are motivated, I believe, knowing that the work that they do will speak for them. Anytime a prospective employer Googles their name, their work on my website comes up. And so I don't think I have to grade them. I think their work speaks for themselves. So I motivate them via the publication and via the critiques in class. They want to do well and show their teammates, their peers, how they do. I've been talking for an hour already? Thanks. All right, let's move on. So the students make their experiments. They use everyday household fluids, often foods, and they see all kinds of physics. Before I taught this class, I did not know very much about surface tension. Now I know a lot about surface tension. This has had a big impact on my students. The reason that I began studying engineering education research was because my students would write to me after years saying, "Oh, Professor Hertzberg, I saw this wonderful cloud, you love it. I saw this interesting soap dispenser with 2 colors of soap coming together and it made me think of you." The students in my flow visualization class write to me and tell me about these things. The students in my traditional fluid mechanics course, where I taught them all the equations and how to solve it, they never write to me. I never hear from them. The flow visualization students write to me all the time that I changed their lives. I let them look at the world in a new way. This is very powerful for an educator. Don't we all want to have that kind of an impact on our students? I want this for all my classes. How can I do that? So I've been trying to take what is happening in this class and amplify it, do it in all my classes. So now I want to show you some of the work of my students and why it is so powerful. After seeing them produce all this work, I have come up with 4 different types of aesthetics, 4 different kind of sets of. It's not organized by the type of physics, but it's a type of an aesthetic. So there's the aesthetic of beauty. We all know that if it's beautiful, then that satisfies one of the art theories, and that makes it art. But there's also aesthetics of power. Powerful things are very attractive to humans. So I think that is an aesthetic all by itself. Destruction is also very fascinating. Humans love to look at scenes of destruction. So I have a very interesting one to show you today. And then fluid mechanics is full of just weird things you don't expect fluids to do. And so that is also an aesthetic. So let's look at some of this. In the aesthetics of beauty, we focus on forms and lines and texture and color. This is abstract art, if you will. So this is, I think, a very beautiful image. When you are bottling, when you make something like maybe a vinegar with an herb in it. Okay, you're going to make a gift for somebody. You make a vinegar with an herb in it. You put it in a nice bottle, and then you put wax around the top of the bottle. Yes. So this is bottle wax. This is the wax, and it's being melted in a hot pot, in a slow cooker pot. And as the wax melts, the index of refraction changes. And so you get these beautiful patterns where the light is interacting differently with the wax in different places, and it forms this kind of a pattern, which is very beautiful. This is another work by my students. They are very fond, I'm not sure why, but they're very fond of things we call the Rubens tube. Has anyone heard of a Rubens tube? It's a tube that maybe this big in diameter, maybe this long, and you put fuel, propane gas in, and you put a balloon on one end, a rubber membrane, okay, so that can vibrate. And then you play music at it, or sound. It's better with pure sound, but my students always want to play rock music and okay? And this sets up acoustic waves inside the tube with regions of high and low pressure. And so where the pressure is high, the flame from the fuel, when you light it, the flames are tall versus low, and so you can play with the heights of the flames all along this tube, and it's called a Rubens tube. It was invented, I don't know, 150 years ago. So this is an image of that with rock music, and the student took the image and reversed the colors. So what was black is now white, what was gold is now blue, and it makes a very striking image. This is a popular video that illustrates mixing. This. So what do you think? Is this not beautiful? And it's done very simply with ink and water. And a high-speed camera. Very handy. But this is an example of professional artists using flow visualization. So, aesthetics of power, where now the aesthetic is about mankind's control over awesome powers. So the example I have here is the Space Shuttle rocket booster filmed close up. They made this video so that they could make sure that the mechanism was released and that the rocket was able to go up, but it is an incredible view. Look at the raw power lifting these tons into orbit. Even without the sound, you can get the feeling of how powerful this is. And that is a whole set of attractions all by itself. The next one I chose before I knew that I was ever going to come to Taiwan. Okay, I didn't know any people from Taiwan or anything, but I found this Chang. Oh, I didn't say that right. I found this, and this is such an example of power and control and precision over what he does, which is so amazing. So you've probably all seen this, maybe live and in person, I don't know. Did any of you see this live in 2011? New Year's, the ROC Centennial, yes. So he uses a computer control over not just the initial firing of all the fireworks, but each piece of fireworks has a radio actuator in it, and so the secondary explosions are also very carefully timed, very tight power and control.
This is another story.
What's that? This is in Beijing. I thought this is ROC. This is not PRC. Right? Isn't that here? I got it wrong? It said ROC. That's okay. Are you sure?
The year is right.
哦，1911年100周年的时候，哦，maybe
百年国庆的时候，就是有时候。
Yeah, because 2011
We just don't.
Wrong centennial.
100th anniversary of.
So maybe the YouTube video where I got the information is wrong. I thought it was.
No,
I'm
maybe
very
you are
close.
right. Maybe you
Okay,
are
we'll go
right.
on. We'll go on. This is another example of control and power, I believe. This is a young man in the United States who has incredible control over vape. He can do things with vortex rings that you and I could never dream of achieving in our laboratory. So I study vortex rings. I study this fluid phenomenon, and I cannot create this myself in my laboratory. But he can do it with, very simply. So he has, he's going to show now vortex leapfrog. He's going to show us a leapfrog, where you make the trailing vortex smaller, bigger, and then it loops around. And so this is illustrating very interesting vortex dynamics.
You know what? Professor Chubet is in Michigan Mechanical Engineering Department.
Yes?
He taught the crash course, and he showed the vortex ring by himself in the classroom.
In the class. It takes a great deal of skill to do this.
And he said it's the only way to legally smoke.
Well, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be nicotine. You can do this with just water and glycerin. So the color is artificial. That was added later. You can't actually make it do that in real life. Not the color, but the shape of the vortex ring, the mutual induction of the vortex ring. Very interesting physics. Okay. So next we have the aesthetics of destruction. Again, humans love to look at this. So you can find on YouTube many collections of amazing images of natural disasters. People love to look at volcanoes exploding, tsunami pictures, avalanches, landslides, which illustrates granular flow. So this is a type of flow visualization. Tornadoes, wildland fires, like in Australia and in California. The burning buildings are fascinating, right? But today I'm going to show you something a little different. So destructions also include things that blow up. The military is very good at this. I'm not going to show you any of that. And instead, I'm going to show you, rocket launch failures are also fascinating to watch. But today I'm going to show you something called a levee. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I drive a fire truck. I use the hose. Okay, we practice this a lot. I go to car crashes and I help people, get out of their crashed vehicles. But the levee is something that all firefighters are terrified of. They're very dangerous, but they're awesome to watch. So here's how a levee works. Let's say you have a tank of liquid fuel, propane. In my neighborhood, I live outside of a town. There's no natural gas supply, and instead everyone has these big tanks, okay? That's all full of propane to heat their homes, to cook with. So you have liquid and vapor inside of a propane tank. Now, let's say that there is a fire coming along, a wildland fire. When the fire touches the tank, it heats the liquid, right? Makes the liquid evaporate. The pressure inside the tank starts to go up. Okay, but that's fine. The tanks are strong. And so long as the heat from the fire is going into the liquid and is being absorbed in changing the liquid from liquid to vapor, everything is fine. But if the flame touches the area where there's vapor, the heat becomes concentrated. The vapor cannot carry the heat away from the wall of the tank. The liquid can carry the heat away from the wall, but the vapor, it cannot carry very much heat. So the flame touching above the level of the liquid in the tank weakens the skin of the tank, and eventually the pressure is high, the metal is weak. So we have then a boiling liquid. The liquid inside is hot enough it's now boiling. Boiling liquid, expanding vapor, explosion. Because of the tank, we have what we call a partial confinement. It can't freely expand. It has to go out through this little hole. It leads to a transition from an ordinary flame into a supersonic combustion. We call this the change from a deflagration to a detonation. And that turns our tank into a rocket. Very, very destructive, unpredictable. We don't know exactly when this is going to happen. But it's fascinating to watch. And here is a very cheerful young woman, Maggie, who collects videos and puts them on YouTube for everyone to see. This is her aesthetic. She loves explosions. Let's watch. It's music. Okay. Causes that kind of an explosion. Wow. Very impressive. Everyone loves to watch this. Okay, now we're going in reverse. Slow motion. And see that? That's the tank. Wow. See, it's trailing like a rocket? Yeah, that's what caused that explosion. Awesome, isn't it? That's the aesthetics of destruction. Last, I want to talk about the aesthetics of oddness, strange things. So, one of the things you may have seen is oobleck. We call it oobleck, but it is cornstarch and water. Cornstarch is what we use to make a soup a little bit thicker. You add it to a soup to thicken it. Yes, I don't know what would it be called in Chinese.
We use another kind of vegetable to use similar things.
Okay. Well, it creates what we call a non-Newtonian fluid. So its behavior is different than air, water, and so on. So you may have also seen videos of Mentos in water, in Coca-Cola. You take a candy tablet, fizzes, you drop it in soda, and you get a nice, fun explosion. Not an explosion, but. So these are what I call just weird things that are fun to watch. It's an aesthetic. Here's one that you may not know about, but most liquid detergents and soaps are also non-Newtonian. And they have a very peculiar behavior. So this is from one of my students who studied what happens when you take a liquid soap and you pour it onto an angled surface. And it's called the K effect because Professor K came to the APS DFD meeting and he said he had noticed this happening and he had no idea why. So if you get up in front of your peers and you confess, here's a phenomenon, I don't know why it's happening, the whole community goes, ah! And then they explain it. But it's a very peculiar thing to watch. So here it is, hitting the surface and then whoosh, whoosh. Has anyone seen this in your home? My washing machine, for my clothes washing machine, has I pull out a drawer to pour in the liquid water. It has a curved surface, and every now and then I see it go, squirts out a jet to the side. And that's the K effect. So it's because the fluid, as it falls, it is stretched, it is sheared, and it is shear thickening. So it becomes stiffer. The more you pull on it, the stiffer it becomes. So where no, it's the other way around. Shear thinnings, okay? So it becomes less stiff the more you mix it, like paint. Paint is very thick and then you stir it a little bit and it becomes thinner. So same stuff. And so where the pocket in the fluid at the bottom is under low shear, it's stiff, and that makes makes it squirt. Anyways, so that's the story there. Students do all sorts of interesting things. I would never have expected them to take shaving cream, dye it with food coloring, and then squirt it through, over a shower drain. You have square holes, and it makes an interesting work of art. Okay, it's odd. Students love to experiment with alcohol. At least in the United States, they certainly do. Just a little bit of alcohol on your thumb, and it will burn briefly, and it won't hurt, I'm told. I have not tried it. So back to the oobleck. If you put oobleck and you vibrate it, oobleck is shear thickening, not shear thinning. When you hit it, it's hard. If you touch it slowly, it's liquid. Your children may like to play with this. You should try this with your children. Okay. If you put it on a loudspeaker so that it's vibrating, it forms lumps that crawl around as if they were alive. So the student is showing a sequence in time. Here's this lump that sticks up and then falls over. And I had to put the face on. That was me. I'm sorry I did that. So we can use these aesthetics. If you can define an aesthetic that is relevant to your discipline, then you can use it in education and what we call outreach, trying to get other people interested in your field. So aesthetics, as I mentioned, are a valid motivation for doing science. It gives pleasure, it drives intrinsic motivation. It can bridge this gap between our cultures if we ask students to work across the divide. And it works at many levels of intensity. Sometimes I ask students to just go online and find an example of flow visualization, and we show it in class and talk about the physics. Or you can have it an entire class. And I think having the entire class like I did is more effective. So, we're about, I have more. Keep going. Do you want to take a break? Anybody need to take a break?
It's very interesting.
How about 5 minutes? Sure. Let's take 5 minutes. Stand up, breathe. Okay, 5 minutes. But as I mentioned, I want this for all my classes. So I want to know why is this so powerful? Why does it work? So I began to study some educational theory and psychology, but all of the studies I've seen are based in the United States. And cultures are different. And so maybe you can help me understand when I talk about what I've learned in the United States. Is it different here? Is it the same here? Has this research been done in a parallel way here? Is it the same or different? I would like to know. So think about that as we go along. So I will now tell you two stories to give a little bit of context to some of these ideas from educational psychology. So I don't know if Mark Twain, is Mark Twain known in China?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so, great. He's a great American writer. Everyone has to read something. How about Richard Feynman? Is he known here also?
Very popular.
Very popular, very good, okay. So here's the first story. It's from Mark Twain. And he had an early career as a riverboat pilot. He was driving ships up the Mississippi River. And he was trained to be able to recognize, as he goes around a curve, he's to recognize, oh, there's a sandbank there. If I hit that with my boat, I'm going to sink. Or here's a log. I can see the river. I can see that there's a log there, and that's also a danger. And so before he became the riverboat pilot, he loved the Mississippi. He loved seeing the sunset. He loved the majestic motion of the water. He loved the Mississippi. But after he became a riverboat pilot and he learned that's a danger, that's a danger, he lost his appreciation of the beauty. So this is called TMI. You know, if you have a friend who's telling you all about her abdominal problems, you might say, TMI, I don't really want to know anymore, please stop, okay? Too much information. So this happened to Mark Twain. He had got too much information about the Mississippi River, and he says, all the grace, the beauty, the poetry had gone out of the river. This happens to our students when we give them too much mathematics, perhaps. We can take a subject that is very beautiful and we can suck all the pleasure out of it if we're not careful. This happens commonly when we give surveys to students before and after a class. Typically in physics, a lot of this research has been done. We find that at the end of the semester, after they've been studying physics for an entire semester, they believe that physics is less useful, less interesting. They don't want anything to do with it when they're done with the semester. They have suffered the Mark Twain story. Okay, and this happens frequently until eventually the student may give up and stop doing biology and become a historian instead. But there's another way. This is from Richard Feynman. This is a famous story he tells. He says, I have a friend who's an artist, and he'll hold up a flower and he'll say, look how beautiful this is. And then he says that as an artist, he can see how beautiful it is, but you're a scientist. You take all the joy and pleasure out of it because you chop it up into little bits and it becomes a dull thing. Feynman says, I see much more in the flower than he does. I can imagine the cells in there and the complicated actions inside, which also have a beauty. And the science knowledge only adds to the excitement. The mystery and the awe, it only adds. I don't see how it subtracts. We want our students to be Feynman. We want them to see the more they know, the more beautiful it can become. We want this, we know that we have this for ourselves. We have it for ourselves in our own disciplines, right? But our students, sometimes, they go down the Twain path. I don't want them to go down the Twain path. I want them to become Feynman. I want them to continually enjoy learning more and more. is now a good point for another discussion. Have you had a Twain experience where the more you learned about a topic, the less you liked it, the less you wanted to know? Okay, have you ended up hating it? Have you had a Feynman experience where the more you know about something, the more beautiful, the more interesting it becomes? Has your knowledge of the fundamentals of your discipline increased your affect? Increased what you like? Does it ever spoil the beauty? Does knowing too much ever detract from the aesthetics in your discipline? So again, please talk to the people around you and see what kind of experiences you have to share. How many of you have had a Twain experience? You started learning something and you ended up hating it. Many of us, okay. Someone want to mention what happened?
When I was first year high school student, senior high school student, my biology teacher was very good. He told us many things about cells. I learned a lot, clearly, but I lost interest. So I came back to biology later.
Okay, all right. Has anyone had a Feynman experience where you started learning about something and then you wanted more and more? Yes, Seta?
Yeah. I had experienced both Mark Twain and Feynman experience. I had both. And first I studied, make research of a museum, of the Tokyo Metropolitan Museum. So I made a research in detail of the very detailed historical fact.
Okay.
I had to research. But in the end, I'm a little bit tired. It's a little bit boring. And the subject, principal subject, which I like to make it clear, was the history of one donator who donated the museum's construction money, like Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie's.
Yeah.
But after I had finished a research on the life of Keito Sato, but I continued the much more relative facts, not major facts, but relative, very detailed facts.
Yes.
So I just losing my way
Okay.
in the
details.
forest,
Ah.
as you said. So nowadays I came back to the major stream of my research.
Yes.
That makes next Feynman experience.
Ah. Okay. To get the essence without being
Yes.
without unnecessary detail.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have okay, so that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, how do we change, how do we make that transition from Twain to Feynman? How do we help our students to make that transition from Twain to Feynman? So what I've seen, in my flow visualization class and in some of my other classes is the aha moment, where students are working on something and then, they finally get it. Have you had this experience, to finally understand something and the pleasure of finally understanding? So sometimes this is called a transformative experience. Once you have had this transformative experience, you can't go back. You cannot unlearn something. But if you have this transformative experience, you learn to love the subject. You want more after that. This is the Feynman experience. We want students to have this experience. It can be identified with 3 markers. One is the expansion of perception. So in my flow visualization class, after they take the class, they see fluid physics everywhere. They see it all around them, and their perceptions have been opened, and now they see fluid physics all the time. They use what they have learned in the classroom outside the classroom. This is, again, something we want all of our students to have. We want them to find use in what we teach them. We want them to apply it. If they've had a transformative experience, they do it without us making them do it. They do it voluntarily, on their own. And they show that they appreciate, they even love the topic. So if they have all of these markers, we can say that they've had this transformative experience. And then they become Feynman instead of Twain. So once I had kind of this framework to describe what was happening to my students in flow visualization, I wanted to try it in a different area. So I then came up with this idea that my students could maybe do this with design. If they expand their perceptions, they could see that design is everywhere around them. Our entire constructed world is made up of objects that have been designed. All aspects have been through some sort of a design process. And so if engineering students can see this everywhere, that is useful for them. So it is, they will benefit from this expanded perception. So I apply some of the structure that I used in flow visualization. I let the students choose what to do. This is called giving them agency. They are allowed to make their own choices. And I give them, a little bit of structure. So they're working on 2 different projects this semester. I'm teaching it this semester. When I go back, I will see what they have created for project number 1. And I told them to upcycle something, not recycle, upcycle. Take some waste material and make it more valuable. So then I ask them to create something which is dynamic, changes in time or space. And that's all I tell them to do, but I want them to apply an aesthetic. So most of my students in this class are mechanical engineering, and then some students from that new program I mentioned, the technology, arts, and media students, and they make an amazing variety of things. They may make a game, they may make a plant holder, they may make something that they want for their home, they may make a gift for a loved one, for their mother, or for their coach. They make all sorts of things, and they make it with some sort of an aesthetic. I say, I don't care what aesthetic you choose, but you have to tell me about it. You have to be able to talk about the aesthetic. Where did it come from? How was it shown in whatever it is you have made? So this also has had an impact on my students. I think many of them have had this transformative experience. I have taken data from surveys that they fill out at the beginning and the end of the semester. We've done some interviews with the students. And so after the class, indeed, they consider engineering design to include both form and function. Their perception is expanded. They still enjoy design at the end of the semester, which is important. I want to make sure they have that. But I found some unintended outcomes as well, some things that I did not expect to happen. Students started telling us that they felt more like engineers after I asked them to be artists. So they say the best part of the class was making something that is completely your own. All the mistakes are your fault. That they managed to incorporate aesthetics into engineering in ways they had not felt before. And I like this one. I felt like I grew exponentially. the creation of my project really stretched my understanding about art and mechanical systems, manufacturing, tolerances, and working with people, very core engineering skills. So they became stronger as engineers in this way. My confidence to succeed as an engineer has increased. And it was because I was able to tackle a whole new method that I didn't know anything about and be successful. I had an unintended outcome which was not as good, which was that towards the end of the semester, students found out, because they were making these projects, I did put them on teams, but because they were making personal projects for themselves, for their mother, and so on, they did not interact with each other as much as I had hoped, using the team structure I had. I've changed that now. I'll see what happens this semester with the different structure. But what I found was that they got to the end of the semester, it wasn't the way they wanted it, and so they just wanted it to work. They didn't care as much about the aesthetics. So their prior training in making it function as engineers, I think that took over at the end. So I'm still trying to figure out how to change that to have them gain satisfaction from executing the aesthetics and not the function. This is a challenge that I face right now. But from those surveys, I found that I had strengthened their identity as engineers. They come out saying, I am an engineer now. Whereas before, they may have felt like a student, that maybe they weren't sure if engineering was for them. But if they can gain more engineering identity, the other studies, not mine, but other people have seen that this correlates with higher graduation rates. They're going to stay engineers. We can keep diverse students who may not be your traditional idea of an engineer. Those students, unusual students, will stay in the program. They say things like, I am an engineer, I belong here in engineering school, and so on. And that this stronger engineering identity correlates with accessibility, the idea that they can do it. And this one is tricky, that there is a perceived fit. Okay, I'm like other engineers now. The problem with that is that having an increased identity as an engineer means that they say, I'm an engineer, I am not an artist, perhaps, or I am not someone in humanities. So we have to be very careful when we strengthen their identity to make sure that they still believe that they can do other things as well. Because we can give them other experiences that will strengthen their identity as engineers. Just the kind of brainwashing that we normally put them through in 4 years makes them into engineers. They think like engineers, they analyze like engineers, they fit as engineers, but if that also means that they are not artists, that they are not interested in humanities, this is a problem, this is the divide. So how do we strengthen their identity as engineers without decreasing their identity in other areas? So this is kind of where my research is now. So this is, I think, our last discussion question. I want you to think about your identity, who you are, and how did you get to be there. I use the illustration of a braid, of something woven together. So, okay, I'm an engineering professor, but I'm also an artist in photography. I have a website, which is my personal photography, and I also like to make things. So I started in combustion research, and then when combustion got interwoven with photography, it changed the way I looked at my field, and now I am more interested in cardiac flow and flow in the human heart because it's very beautiful. So this is part of my identity as an engineering professor with these different aspects in fluid mechanics and so on. I mentioned I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and that has woven into my identity as an engineering professor because There are great examples that I use from firefighting. I use that in my classes with my students. They calculate flow in hoses. They analyze the efficiency of the pumps used in firefighting. We talk about combustion, all sorts of things. So that is now woven into my identity as a professor. And now I do education research, and that is also woven in. I have other things in my life too. Everyone does, right? I love to hike. I love to garden. I have a family that I love. I'm married to James, and he is a musician, and he plays folk music. So now I do folk dance. And so these are other threads in my life, but they're not necessarily part of my professional identity. So is your identity only in your profession? Do you have other identities as well? Please discuss this and maybe think about your identity and talk about it with the people around you. Now, please. So I think our goal should be for our students to have a blended identity where they have a strong professional identity without rejecting skills from the other side of the divide. So how can we help them retain this or grow it in the first place, generate this a blended identity? So now I want to present to you the idea of a mindset. This has been very popular in education research in the past 10 years in the United States. Work by Harold Dweck, who studied this first in school children, but I think it applies to people, not just school children. The idea that if you have a fixed mindset, that you believe that your intelligence and your abilities are not going to change very much. That, if you have skills as an engineer, you're never going to be an artist. You're never going to be someone who can write beautiful stories, something like that. All right? That's fixed mindset. But a growth mindset is the idea that you can increase your intelligence through practice, that you get better at something, whatever it may be, when you practice it. Most people have some of this experience as well. The idea that you can get better at anything by working, by practicing. If you believe that your intelligence is fixed, that you are not going to get any better at something, you have your skills and talents, and that's all you'll ever have, that is true for you. You will never get better at anything else. But if you believe that you can improve at anything if you work at it, that growth mindset, that also becomes true for you. You will grow, and you can increase your intelligence through practice. So we try to encourage students now to think in these terms, to think that, we try to encourage the growth mindset. The idea that it is worth trying, that it's worth working, that you will get better at something. So I would like, my goal for my students is that they can be the engineer, but they can also be the artist. And that even though they may have natural skills and talent as an engineer, they can still improve and create meaningful work as an artist, even so. So that is, this is an area of research. I do not know the answer yet. I hope the answer is yes. So, I guess this is my last question. One last discussion. What do you feel about this issue? Do you feel that intelligence is fixed? That a student who is not a good student, maybe they should find a different area. Okay? Or have you ever seen a student who can improve, who changes, who can grow? Maybe they struggle initially, but they finally improve. So do you believe that your students have fixed intelligences or can grow? Can you yourself grow through practice? And this kind of gets at what we believe about our students' talents as well. If they're just not succeeding as students, should you spend time with them? You know, are they worth spending the resource? Because resources are always limited. So this is a question of values also. Please discuss. I think that teaching art and engineering can be transformative. And that we can help our students in many ways if we open our ideas about what is art and we encourage them to pursue it in whatever way is appropriate for their studies. It can lead to a transformative experience and maybe even lifelong learning, which is something else that we want for our students. We want them to continue to learn and improve and change their entire lives. I think that this view of art and an emphasis on aesthetics can add value and meaning to their work no matter what they end up doing. And it can enhance their broadened identity to help them see themselves as whole humans, not just engineers. So, in summary, I believe that it can bridge this gap between cultures. Thank you.
This speech is too wonderful. So, although it's over the time that we expected, and we have limited time to discuss, but it's over to everyone. Any comments? Any questions?
I'm curious about the gender distribution in your class, the male and female.
The first time I taught flow visualization, I had many more women in my class than is normal in my discipline. In mechanical engineering, we only had 12% women at that time. But after the class ran the first time, and students learned about what the class was, and they all wanted to take it. And so after that, because of the timing of registration, it filled up very quickly. And then, since then, the distribution of men and women has been the same as in the regular population because it fills up so quickly. And so it becomes representative in that way. I would like to offer many sections so as many people as want to take it can. Maybe then I would get more women in the class, I don't know.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Yes.
I believe this is an elective course, right?
Yes.
Can you see any specific characteristic of your student different from other courses?
It is elective, and I still see a diverse set of students. There are students in the military program in my class. There are the engineers who have never done anything else in the class. There are students who have very interesting backgrounds with already bringing in experience in art and design and so on. I have not had large enough groups of students to do any kind of statistical analysis to say how they're different. I do believe that we should be offering more choices to students. Our program in mechanical engineering is very rigid. 80–90% of their courses are required courses. They all have to take those courses. I think this has a disadvantage because when you tell someone they have to do it, their attitude decreases. They are more likely to end up Twain instead of Feynman. So because this is an elective, I think that brings a more open mindset to the class.
And I believe you have taught this class for several years, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so is there any big changes in your part?
On my part?
Yeah, and why?
Yes. The class has evolved over time. And initially, when I taught the course, I did surveys before and after.
Yeah.
And I would find that their perception of fluid mechanics would increase until 1 year, my college started making large displays of the art from the students, and they put them all over the college. And so now students already know about flow visualization before they take the class. And so they're already excited about it when they take the class, so I don't see the improvement anymore because they come in loving it already. So in a way that has destroyed some of the value of the research I was trying to do with the subject. But I cannot argue with the results because I still think it is a benefit to the students. Did I answer your question?
Did you have any?
Did I change the class?
Yeah, change
over time.
Big change.
Big change. Yes. Initially, the students, when we did critique, it was only verbal in class. In more the tradition of an art class. Art class, traditionally, critique is only verbal. Engineering students don't like to criticize each other in class. They would not speak. The art students, who were used to critique in class, they would be the only ones talking. They were comfortable making suggestions and asking questions. So I did change the way the critique works in class. First, I allowed students to type their questions. So on the website, they go to the website, it's a WordPress blog, and they can add their comments by typing. And so that worked well to get the engineering students to contribute more during critique, to add more comments. 1 year ago, I started a more structured critique process. This is based on Liz Lerman's critical process method, in which there are 4 stages. You have a moderator for the critique, so the artists present their work, and then the audience, the responders, give statements of meaning. How did this work impact them? What do they think about it? And so this is where positive comments usually come out. They say, oh, I really loved this aspect of it. And I ask that the statements of meaning be honest and specific. Okay, they can't just say, great job. That's not helpful, that's not useful. Okay, so no generic pat on the back or pat on the head, no. It has to be specific and honest. Stage 2, the artist asks the audience, do you like the way the color moves from here to here? Did you notice that I was trying to do this? So they can ask the audience for feedback, and I encourage students to edit their work and resubmit. So this is where the artist asks they can ask what should be changed. Third stage is, let's see, the third stage are neutral questions, where the audience is allowed to ask the artist questions without an opinion embedded. So they can't say, why is it so dark? That has a strong opinion in it, right? It should not be so dark. Why did you make it so dark? And instead, we ask the audience to say, tell us about the balance of light and dark in your image. Why did you choose this way? Okay, so no opinion. Stage 4 is where any leftover opinions can be offered, but they can only be offered if the artist agrees. The person in the audience can say, I have an opinion about light and dark. Do you want to hear it? And then the artist can say yes or no. They can say, no, thank you, I already know very well what I'm going to do about the light and the dark. You don't have to tell me. And so they don't have to hear the opinion. So this structure encourages the engineering students to fit their reaction into one of these categories. And this makes it easier for them to offer really useful feedback. So I'm really loving this, this method that I read about recently, and I used it last semester in flow visualization. I'm using it this semester, and so far the feedback I have from the students is that they appreciate this way of giving critique. And this way it's not just useless feedback, it is feedback that they can use to improve their work. And this could be used not just for evaluating artwork, but any kind of work in progress. So I am working with our capstone design team so that students can use this to evaluate their projects in other ways, in other areas also.
Thank you.
What were the circumstances? What were the circumstances that made you want to offer this course? And what kind of preparation did you do before you actually offer the course? And do you consider yourself as very exceptional among your colleagues, engineering colleagues? Or you consider
I'm exceptional in that I have a unique set of skills, but all of my colleagues are amazing people with unique set of skills also. Okay, so no, I'm not that exceptional. For preparation, I started doing photography when I was in high school, and I loved photography. When I was an undergraduate, I was allowed to take fine art photography classes, and it counted towards my engineering degree. When I became an engineering professor, I found that was no longer allowed. The accreditation board for the United States said no, students should not take any fine art classes. That's basket weaving. Okay, that is totally not appropriate for engineering students. That made me so angry. Right? I believe that dehumanizes our students. So when my university offered a tiny amount of money, if an engineering professor would walk across campus, walk across the divide, and partner with a professor from the other side to offer a class, they were thinking that engineering students would work with social science and humanities professors, but I wanted to work with an artist. And they finally said, oh, okay. So I got myself a photography professor, and we worked together to start the class. And then as time went on, he was not able to, because having two professors teach one class did not make sense for his department, or for mine for that matter. So I have been teaching it on my own since then. That was about 3 years in. I have background in fluid mechanics, I have background in photography, and I wanted to put them together, and that's how this class started.
Do you think this is going to extend to maybe giving some suggestion to the engineering community in general in terms of engineering education?
I hope so. That's what I'm trying to do, but I have to, you know, like anything, you have to have evidence. And so I'm still working on acquiring the right kind of evidence. And doing research in psychology and engineering education psychology is very difficult. It may not be costly, but doing a good job having well-crafted research questions that you can actually answer, this is very difficult. And so it is a work in progress.
In terms of growth identity,
yes.
You just mentioned the evidence.
Yes.
Any of your students claim himself or herself by the art or design-oriented engineering student, or vice versa, engineering-oriented art students?
Yes. I'm not sure what your question is about. So I have, so the students in my class are a broad spectrum. Some of them are, you know, just engineers, and this is very new to them. And some of them have been trying to do both the whole time. Okay. And this may be the first class where that is allowed. But I believe that if this is more common in engineering, that we will attract more diverse students with these other talents. Because knowing that visual arts are not appreciated in engineering, then the students who are interested in that have gone elsewhere. But I would like them to come back and be engineers and contribute in this way.
Imagine you have Mark Twain and Richard Feynman in your class.
Yes.
How would you conduct? To me, that seems to be a nightmare.
Ah.
You could lose a great writer and great physicist at the same time. Because of the way the education system works,
Yes.
they both will not survive to be where they were.
I believe that we should not limit our students. I believe that especially good students, they are bomb-proof. I cannot hurt them. No matter what I teach them, they are going to succeed. The students who need my help the most are the students who are not sure, who have not identified their own talents yet. And so I believe that by encouraging them to do more, to be more, that will help them. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to do a lot of work.
Hmm?
Cannot have too many students in one class. Right.
Oh, you can have a wide variety of students in a class. Yes, I believe you can. And like I said, the best students, I give them a structure and they go. I don't have to, I can't hurt them, and any structure I give them will help. And so I think it's important to help all the students at all levels. And that works well, actually, that it makes it possible. Because we can't separate our students into, a class of only great students and a class of only struggling students. I don't think that is helpful. I think having them together is better.
A very good question. Since I know that in Colorado recently there's a huge initiative that encourages something like just disciplinary kind of thing, like romantic speaking there, and art and media. So can you tell me, share with fellows a little bit about how your university encourages this kind of something like just disciplinary kind of collaboration in teaching or in research and other kind of perspective?
My university has been going through some restructuring.
Yes.
I think you're referring to the fact that we used to have a school of journalism. We no longer have a school of journalism, and now we have a school of CMCI, communications, media, informatics, and something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I have some colleagues in that area, and so the university talks a certain amount about encouraging cross-disciplinary work, but the truth is that there are still many bureaucratic difficulties with this. I mentioned one being the scheduling. Another is the way money flows in a university. It flows down into the departments, and that ends up in silos. And so I'm no longer able to teach with my colleague from photography because of the finances. So I think it is an idea that they would like to promote, but there's no money behind it as yet.
What's your answer to your own question? Are students without talent worth your time?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. I'm very firm on that. That if I can encourage students who may love science but have difficulty in math, they may end up being wonderful in science once they find their way. And so again, the best students, I can't hurt them. So, nor can I help them a great deal. They are they have their path, and they make themselves go down that path quickly. So if I don't slow them down, that's good. Other students need my help more, and so those are the ones that I hope to help. And I want to encourage all of their talents if I can.
Okay, thank you.
you. Sorry, it's about time to close today's session, but fortunately, she will give another speech tomorrow morning. And,
is it tomorrow? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, tomorrow morning. I'll give the same speech, actually. You can come back and hear it again.
I think her speech is quite inspiring, so maybe we can think about the contents and maybe generate some ideas later.
Or maybe I shouldn't give the talk and we can have more discussion instead. Maybe.
There are some other people.
Oh, new people coming.
New people
Okay.
coming. So it will be quite interesting. We can have more interesting interactions tomorrow.
Okay.
And we have more free time to talk tomorrow in other sessions.
Okay.
So please come back tomorrow if you have other questions.
Or if you want to see the beautiful pictures again. Okay, thank you so much.